All right, welcome back, everybody. Dustin, thanks so much for coming back on. I love that you come on our show on a regular basis, and I say it every time. You're more than welcome to come on anytime you want. We love having you. It's always a good time. So thanks again for coming on.
Well, absolutely. I'm glad to be back, and I'm even more excited about the post, this chat. The next time we'll talk will either be right before Vikings-Giants or the Tuesday after Vikings-Giants. That's how damn close we are to the real deal. It's so awesome.
Yeah, we've had a good rhythm with you about once a month, and so yeah, right, that'll be right about week 1 time frame next time we have you on. But this time we got plenty to talk about. You kind of mentioned it a little bit before we hit record. There's quite a bit that we can talk about, especially since the last time you were on. But I kind of noticed, so on VikingsTerritory.com, I noticed an article posted as of now that we're recording this. It was posted yesterday by Jan. Basically titled 3 Vikings off-season theories that you can forget about. And yeah, we've had some news today, August 6th, the first unofficial depth chart was released. And this article came out before that, but you even said it a few minutes ago. It kind of stood the test of the new information with that depth chart. So I thought it'd be cool to kind of walk through that article and then point people there. So yeah, Evan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the first thing that Yannick wrote about, his first point, first of 3 theories, was that JJ needs a redshirt year. I think that was the headline above the section there. And I think everything that I've heard from camp on Twitter and some of the news things is that he's having a really good training camp. He's looking really solid, and he's proving that he may not need to sit the bench for very long, if even at all. And I think that's what makes the depth chart so interesting. We were just talking about the depth chart before we hit record. And so what do you do, Dustin, with kind of the incongruity between all of this amazing stuff we're hearing about Dustin, about JJ McCarthy at camp, and then the depth chart comes out and he's not the top guy?
So the depth chart released like today's is always fantastic because it is a confirmation or a contradiction of what you've been thinking for about 3 months since the draft. And one of the things I've learned over the years about depth charts, whether they're from Mike Zimmer or Kevin O'Connell, is that they're not ironclad in that if your guy is buried, so to speak, that doesn't mean like, oh, I was wrong about him. It doesn't mean that at all. It just takes sometimes younger guys or unsung guys a little longer in the summer to climb the depth chart. Yannick Eckhart, who we just talked about, he tweeted today, last year at this time, Jordan Addison was WR4. We were like, really? And then Ivan Pace, even after the hype train had already begun, he was ILB5 last year. So if you're rookie, your favorite rookie A, is not where you want him on the depth chart, we still got a whole preseason to go. Conversely, the depth chart is really good about identifying climbers. So if your guy is already up there, like Deshaun Jones is listed as WR6, we're like, oh, wow, so that steam was kind of real. Or Fabian Moreau. I don't know a whole lot of Fabian Moreau stands, but he just showed up last week, and he's CB4 over Andrew Booth. So those are my disclaimers about the depth chart. Is it doesn't usually promote somebody unjustly, but it doesn't mean if your guy's buried that you have to say, oh, yep, I got that wrong. On McCarthy, I don't really care that he is QB2/3 on the depth chart because I've listened to what O'Connell has said about him in the last 3 weeks since training camp began. He even said last week, you look at the depth chart, he told the reporters, you guys see it, these guys are pretty even. And it's like, oh, if you're starting to say that shit, that means we're working our way into this by September 3rd or something. It won't be weird at all if O'Connell makes McCarthy the starter. About his summer so far, usually in situations like this, I will tell anybody or shows like this, like, you got to give it time, fellas, guys and gals. This guy's 21 years old. We knew that he was going to be a project. You don't have to say that about J.J. McCarthy at all. You have to say that about my guy, Drake May, on the Patriots. Joe Milton is performing better than Drake May at Patriots camp. But the perk of McCarthy instead of May, it kind of became a binary choice between those two guys, you'll recall, in April, was Drake May was always going to have to sit a year. That was across the board. The prognosis on his scouting report is really raw. All the talent in the world, got to give it until 2025. With McCarthy, it was the opposite. Like, he doesn't throw the ball very much because they run it all the time in Ann Arbor, but he is game ready. So I think we're seeing that in living color at training camp, on the field, the throws. And then about 25% of the battle for a rookie is the microphone and sounding poised enough, sounding mature. And I'll be damned if McCarthy doesn't sound like that already. And then the leadership era. Every time I pull up an article from Dalton Reisner or TJ Hawkinson, they're all saying like, oh, this kid's going to be good. So I would be flabbergasted if McCarthy turns out to be shitty or mid. He really feels like he's going to be good. I still think that the Vikings, because they're the Vikings, will start with Darnold. But who really cares? They can pivot to McCarthy week 2 or week 3. Like if they start off 0-3, there's no timetable that says, well, it looks like Darnold's going to be the QB1. Fine. That doesn't mean that he's going to take it for the rest of the season. And I've dialed back any idea of a McCarthy redshirt season because he looks so mature. And I'll say this 100 times before the regular season. If it was up to me, I would start McCarthy no matter what. I was saying that on draft night. Because I don't really care if the Vikings go 4-13 or 5-12 or 6-10. I want to get to 2025 and have that be a year where we're like, all right, we are going to contend now. We've got the rookie quarterback who got his lumps out of the way last year. You got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkins, all these guys in their prime. I don't want to have McCarthy sit for a whole year. Then we get to this time next year and we're like, oh, let's see how McCarthy looks. We'll have to work him along, and then 2026 is the new year. So if it was up to me, I would start McCarthy, but I've been saying that since April 25th.
Yeah. So I've been saying the whole time, even before they actually drafted the guy, they're going to draft somebody. I've been saying once Sam Darnold was signed, really, I've been saying, all right, let's go with Darnold, and not even until Darnold loses a job. I just don't want the rookie to come in. I don't want him to get the job until he earns it, because that's the best way for development and for the best of the team. So I've kind of been, one hand in both pots here for that whole mindset of like, I want Darnold to start the whole time, and then I want JJ to, earn the job. But I think we're seeing the idea that JJ may be earning that job earlier than most people would have thought, regardless of if you wanted him to start day one, whether he was ready fully or not, just to learn by fire. I think at least the Vikings are doing a good job of making it seem like he's coming along quickly, and he's learning, and he's, Kirk Cousins like on the microphone, like you just said, just saying all the right things, and seems like he's doing all the right things. I think he might earn the job earlier than expected, and I'm okay with that. If it works out, let's go.
And it's an unforeseen problem to have, where I've been feeling for the past week or so that who cares? Like either guy is probably going to be pretty good because they'll already be battle tested against each other. O'Connell's not going to start the lesser guy just because he's sticking to some script. Mm-hmm. And where we were thinking maybe May 1st, May 2nd, like, well, both these guys might be shit, so let's just get through this and hopefully they get to 500 or something. Mm-hmm. To me, it feels like you're going to pick from two guys that are quite good based on this offense. Not saying Darnold has been good before, but I have changed my tune about how I'm thinking about this in just this walkover season, 7-10, 8-9. I probably will still predict that for the record, but there's a lot of enthusiasm between these two guys that it doesn't necessarily have to be a lost season. They both seem like they fit in this offense, and I trust Kevin O'Connell with a quarterback. Both these guys can throw outside the numbers. That was Joshua Dobbs' problem. He couldn't do that. Jaron Hall was way too raw, and then Nick Mullins is a gunslinger of all gunslingers. So when you find Darnold and McCarthy, I think O'Connell can find a guy that can protect the football, move the sticks, throw some touchdown passes. So I don't think all this shit about like, oh, they're guaranteed to be in last place because NFC North is so brutal. I don't really buy it. I trust Kevin O'Connell, and I love that we have two quarterbacks to choose from that feel really exciting in the summer.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's going to make preseason way more.
Oh, God. Remember the Sean Mannion days? I hated preseason with Sean Mannion because it's like, why do we have to watch this? But yeah, continue.
Well, I mean, for the first time in a long time, we don't have a situation where the bona fide starter is just going to sit all the way through preseason, and we don't know who the starter is going to be. So I would expect to see all four of the guys that are still on the roster at that position mixed in at various points throughout the preseason until they figure out what the order is going to be and which guy's going to pack his bags.
Yeah. That's what I expect as well. I think each one will get a quarter, give or take, based. I don't think they're going to take a guy out in the middle of a drive when they go to the second quarter or something like that. But I'll say this before we put a bow on the McCarthy topic. If this guy was going to make a case for himself to win the job outright this summer, this is exactly how it would go, what we're seeing unfold. Like, there's no variations between a hostile takeover by a young quarterback than what you're seeing right now. Every time I go to say, like, I try to find, like, all right, well, am I being a homer about this guy? And you watch the tape and you read the stuff and you're like, no, I just think he is that good so far for his age and his development.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think your tweet from the other day, maybe in a week ago, and you alluded to it a few minutes ago, that we should be saying, calm down, guys. JJ's fine. Of course he sucks. He's 21. He's never been in the NFL before. But like your tweet said, and what you said a few minutes ago, we're not saying that. Like, we should be a little excited. Like, it's okay to be a little excited about this guy.
It is, and it's going to be so. Let's say we're doing your show, August 2027, and we're like, yeah, remember McCarthy? He hasn't quite worked out. It's going to be so weird if we have to say that, because it will have meant that Jim Harbaugh was flatly wrong. I mean, he just gushed about him coming out of the draft. Thor Nystrom, who's fantastic at his job, it will mean he will be absolutely wrong. All of these Vikings players that have been like, this guy is good, they're going to be all wrong. Like. So it feels more grandiose and bankable than Teddy or Ponder. I remember those guys, and I remember thinking, yeah, maybe they'll be good. But right now, in private like conversations with Yannick through our Slack channel, he and I are like trying to pinch ourselves, like, what are we like? Why is this too good to be true? And we haven't come to a resolution as to why that is for Mr. McCarthy.
All right. Well, I think it stands to be said that at least the three of us, we're McCarthy fans. We think he has the chance to be a real deal. We've gushed on him enough. So I think we can move on to the second theory that can be busted here from Yannick. And that second theory was that the Vikings needed to acquire a wide receiver 3. I think that was a bulk of part of our conversation the last couple times you've been on our show, Dustin, and you've identified a few WR3s out there. Hunter Renfrow is the big name that comes to my mind. That the Vikings need to get somebody, and obviously they really didn't. And it seems like it's kind of working out so far, even without the Hunter Renfrow or somebody in there. What should we also, in the same way we're kind of believing in JJ McCarthy, should we start to kind of believe in some of these, wide receiver 3s, the Deshaun Jones or the, any of the other guys?
Yes, and it's for a couple reasons. I still would not have a problem if my phone buzzed tomorrow morning and said Hunter Renfrow. I'd be like, cool. Yeah, like to the Vikings, let's do it. But they never had a human body problem at wide receiver. They've always had 10 or 11 since the end of undrafted free agency. So the bodies were there. It was trusting whether or not Jalen Nailor, A, would break out again this summer, which he has, and then B, stays healthy. That story hasn't been written yet. We got to make sure he stays healthy. We never beefed with his speed or his scouting report from Michigan State. It's that I've told this story a couple times. Last year, when I go to write something, even remotely involving Nailor, I would stop researching what was wrong with him injury-wise. Because every time I looked him up, there was something dinged. I know, concussion, and I was just like, I don't really care anymore what's wrong with him because he's never available. So I let that permeate my offseason, thinking that guy isn't trustworthy. And so that was me being way too cynical about him. It makes all the sense in the world that the Vikings didn't pursue a high-profile WR3 in free agency, sure as hell didn't draft one, because they said, we've got Jalen Nailor at home. And none of us really knew that or trusted the injury resume enough to believe in it. So we pivoted to Brandon Powell. And we're like, well, we could talk ourselves into him being WR3. And I was like, I guess. And then Trent Sherfield was their one veteran signing at that spot. And today on the depth chart, he's buried at like WR6. And so you try to wonder, like, Aaron, that I don't even know if Sherfield's going to make the team. There's a couple other things that make me less anxiety about WR3. The biggest, of course, is Jalen Nailor looking the part. But then it seems like Jordan Addison's suspension probably won't happen right away. And if they have Hawkinson back by the time Addison's suspended at all, I don't give a shit about the WR3. I just don't, because TJ Hawkinson is the WR3 on any given Sunday. So if they can somehow accidentally line those up, WR3 goes out the window. If Jalen Naylor's good, it's gravy. Brandon Powell will do a couple heroic things. So it seems like the timing of the would-be Addison suspension will either happen in the middle of the season or just be pushed off until next year, and we'll be talking about how it will affect the season in 2025. And then, basically Hawkinson, his injury recovery seems a little more swimmingly than first let on. I still expect him to miss the first part of the season. But just like we talked, I think, off air about RB3, I really wouldn't care about WR3 because I trust Kevin O'Connell. But the fact that Addison might have been suspended and start the season, Hawkinson's still recovering, you're looking around at pass catchers that are Justin Jefferson, Brandon Powell, Johnny Munt. Like, how are we going to win games like this when we have Sam Darnold at quarterback? Those worries are a little bit put on the back burner because Naylor looks good and healthy. Hawkinson's prognosis is better than expected, and then any Addison suspension probably won't happen. I don't think it's possible for it to happen in week 1.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to bring up the idea that Hawkinson, just the way everybody's talking, and apparently he's been doing stuff on the sidelines, and it seems like he's coming along better than would be expected at this point of an ACL tear. So that is the nice thing to kind of make you that cherry on top of like, I guess the wide receiver 3 might not be that huge of an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Have any thoughts on, do you believe in Jalen Naylor? Do you kind of not really care like Dustin's saying, or is Brandon Powell going to be the savior?
No, I definitely agree with what you said, Dustin, especially when Hawkinson's back and healthy and contributing. He's the bona fide wide receiver 3. We don't have to worry about anything else that way. But I like what Yannick said in his article. He mentioned that if you've got Naylor and Brandon Powell, O'Connell's got some options depending on what you need to do. Naylor's a good route runner, and Brandon Powell's got good speed. So depending on what you need and what route you need him to run and where you need him to catch the ball, you can kind of mix and match. So if it is going to be Jefferson, Addison, and then a combination of Naylor and Powell at 3 and 4, I think you like those options, and hopefully you can kind of pick up the slack with your tight end game until Hawkinson's back.
Yeah, with Hawkinson, when you have a guy who's that handsomely paid and then because he's so darn good, gets those targets, it's kind of like the Chiefs. Do you think the Chiefs fans sit up late at night wondering who the WR3 is going to be? No, they don't give a shit. It's usually Sky Moore or Mecole Hardman, and we're like, those guys are footnotes because you have Raji Rice, like the tame version, Travis Kelce, and then with the flavor of the week at WR2. So not that the Vikings offense is going to emulate the Chiefs, but when you have a tight end that gets 100, 120 targets, that's more than WR3 gets, and then you're really realistically in a target share talking about a WR4. So let's just get Hawkinson back and all will be gravy.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move to the last kind of line item here that Yannick wrote about. A theory that we can kind of dismiss would be that guard battle between Brandel and Reisner. And this one kind of surprised me as things in training camp have developed, because I really thought this would have been more of a battle. And I thought Reisner would have maybe made a little bit more of a case for himself, especially considering the fact that nobody wanted him for such a long time and he signed a contract so late in the game. You'd think he'd come into training camp with a little bit of a fire under his butt to come out and prove that he's starter worthy, and that just hasn't happened. It seems like, and with the depth chart coming out today, where is he at? I don't even see him on here. He's behind Ingram, second string right guard.
Yeah, on the right side, yeah.
So, and he's been, from what I've heard on Twitter and stuff, he's getting mostly second team reps, hasn't really had any first team reps. So what do you make of that, Dustin? Thoughts on Reisner?
Well, when he signed in May, whatever day that was, I remember thinking, oh, sweet, he's coming back after all. And then it took a couple days for his deal details to come out, and it was like 2-point-something million. Oh, he's not going to start. This Blake Brandel stuff was real. So I have swallowed the idea that Brandel's going to be the starter. But I don't understand if they're going to indeed put Reisner on the bench. Why is it at right guard? I don't understand that because he's a lifelong left guard. And then on the depth chart today, Michael Juergens, who we thought was a center, is listed at left guard. And it's like, okay, so you're not going to start Reisner. And you also say, like, get the hell out of your usual spot. You've been demoted to right guard. Maybe it doesn't make that big of a deal to them. I've always been told that those guys can be interchangeable, but they prefer the one spot. And it felt last year like they were hell-bent on putting Reisner at left guard, waiting on almost Ezra Cleveland to get hurt. And then Reisner had his takeover. So, yes, when Reisner came aboard that first few days, I was like, sweet, I guess they realized Randall wasn't that good after all. That's kind of what I thought. And money talked, though, because Randall is paid more money than Reisner. He feels like a shoe-in at left guard. And then I hope, and I don't think they're ready to give up on Ed Ingram. And Ed Ingram is a uniquely different guard than Dalton Reisner because Ed Ingram is good at run protection or run blocking, and Reisner is not. And then Ingram is mid at pass protection, and Reisner's wonderful at that. So it almost is like the NFL, like a cabal, was like, we don't want you one-trick pony. Like, we don't want a guy who only protects the quarterback. I don't think that's what they said, but that's what it seems like the hints suggest. So it is a little strange that we are here in August, and we're like, oh, yeah, that guy's a bench player. When for what? 6-7 years, we were starved for a player like Reisner that could protect the quarterback. We used to pray for it. I will trust their judgment with Ingram and hope that he takes his big leap in year number 3. But based on Reisner being in there with the second teamers, if you have Reisner anywhere in your projections as a starter, I think it's time to yank him out unless Ingram falls flat on his face. And this is a good problem to have. You have Dalton Reisner, who is probably the best backup guard in the NFL, and we already know from training camp that injuries are a real thing. We haven't even got to the regular season ones yet. It'll be sweet to have some depth for once at the interior offensive line.
Yeah, it's a whole situation that just feels weird because what we saw with our own eyes, and yeah, there's probably like 10 bona fide offensive line experts out there in the world that can tell you exactly like, oh yeah, that's actually a good offensive line, or no, they're missing their blocks, but they're getting lucky. I feel like from my, amateur viewpoint, Reisner, when he took over at left guard, the offensive line seemed to kind of mesh together a little bit better last season in 23, and he seemed like a really good addition. Obviously, and then the perception was that when he got the starting job after Cleveland got hurt, he never let it go enough that he traded Cleveland away, and so maybe it's just like they were already going to trade Cleveland away. I don't know, but it just feels like what we saw last year doesn't mesh with what we're seeing now, and it probably doesn't help that Reisner is also like kind of a fan favorite, a media guy. So I guess what we have to chalk it up to and be okay with is what you just said, that it's a good problem to have. Right? Seems to be a good player, and I guess if you have a good player on the bench, that means the starters are better anyway. So yeah, as long as Darnold and or McCarthy are staying upright more often than not, I guess we can't really complain too much. The way who's playing, yeah.
The way that I'm rationalizing, Reisner on the bench really for this team that had such shitty guard play for 5 years, it's that I think they believe in the upside and development of Ed Ingram as the total package, so that we already know he can run block pretty damn well. Well, he's in year 3 now. We've also seen this summer that this guy can pass block. I think their goal is for the guy that they selected in the second round 2 years ago. We have faith in him to become a very good offensive lineman at both facets. When you look at Reisner, and he's very visibly is a one-trick pony, a wonderful pass blocker. And you have to remember, this is a team that desperately needs to fix their ground game. Otherwise, it's almost meaningless to analyze Vikings football if they can't fix the ground game, because no team ever gets to the Super Bowl ranking 27th, 28th in rushing efficiency because you can't close out football games if you can't run the ball. So I think it aligns with their vision, which I think they actually believe in this year. They said it last year too and didn't fix anything. We're going to run the football. Even O'Connell used the dirty words last week. We're going to establish the run. He said they used to drive Vikings fans crazy during the Zimmer era. So I think that in order to do that, you can't roll in with Reisner, and you want to bank on your ability to cultivate Ingram into the total package.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. All right, so we've sprinkled it in the whole conversation this whole time, but let's actually focus on it a little bit. What are your thoughts on the first unofficial depth chart release that was just released today?
Oh, I got a lot of thoughts on it. I don't know if we want to take them one by one or go rapid fire. I think the biggest thing to me, and I'm trying to obey my own caveat at the top of the show that if a guy is buried, that's not gospel. But Robert Tonyan is the tight end 5. And we're like, all right, well, we were told that he had a wonderful mini camp. He had some back spasms at training camp, but that doesn't mean you get demoted. And you're going to have a football team on September 8th that probably doesn't have TJ Hawkinson. So you would think that Tonyan would be higher up on that depth chart. I expected him to be probably Hawkinson. What would it be? Oliver, because he's a run blocking guy. Tonyan, Munt, and then your Nick Muse and Trey Knox. Mm-hmm. But no, Tonyan is buried, and we'll see if that one holds. Did that one surprise you guys at all?
I've been a little cynical about the Tonyan. Not cynical, but not like...
Then you're vindicated.
Believer.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been of the mindset, and I definitely said something to this tune on the Skol Hop here, but he's been bouncing around so much. I think his best year was 2 or 3 years ago with the Packers, and it's not like he's ever been a 1,000-yard receiver, which, I mean, he's a tight end. He's probably not going to be unless you're Travis Kelce or last year knocking on the door for TJ Hawkinson before that. But, I mean, Tonyan, I don't know. He seems like a guy that he's athletically gifted and talented, but he's bounced around so much that it's hard for me personally to get behind him and believe in him. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, you're right. His best season was, I'm looking at it right now, 2020.
4 years ago.
With Green Bay. He had 11 touchdowns. And, I mean, yeah, I was a little more excited about him just because I recognized the name. I didn't really follow him as a player, but anytime you can steal a guy from the bad guys, it's always a good day, in my opinion. So, yeah, I'm surprised that he's as low as he is, and I'm sure injury has something to do with that.
Yeah, with the back spasms, I don't know if we'll see him on Saturday for his sake, hopefully so. A couple more that I got. I'll package the next two into one category. The Gabriel Murphy hype, if you trust the depth chart, that is real because he's listed as the OLB 5 in the order they do it. They never make it easy. They never just go down to make a chart. They have to put semicolons and the word or and all this shit. It's like, really? Just have me come there and I'll show you how to do this. So Gabriel Murphy, that hype seems real, and if he is truly the OLB 5, that means he's right on the roster bubble and would probably make it. In that same light, I think we brought up Deshaun Jones. He was like the WR6, I believe, and when they usually have or 11 or 12 wide receivers, he could have checked in at WR12, and we'd be like, oh, that's a mistake. Maybe he'll climb later this summer, but it appears that all of the observations from some on Deshaun Jones are real, and then certainly Gabriel Murphy, who, just like Ivan Pace, exact same thing. Most draft heads were like, why didn't this guy go in round 3 or 4? Because his arms were too small? Really? It's like they didn't learn their lesson. So those two stood off the page to me, Murphy and Jones as climbers. That seems real.
Yeah, Deshaun Jones, I don't know. I want to believe in him, so I'm going to take all the things that they say about him and just really pump it up. But, I mean, he's above, or at least it's the Deshaun Jones and Trent Sherfield. Yeah. But I think that's more of they're tied for whatever year that they're in. But
he has no business being in that category with Sherfield. Sherfield's been around for 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. But that's still even higher than Lucky Jackson, who's been on the team, the last year or so. Yep. Thayer Thomas, who was, I think he undrafted, but kind of outed undrafted guy. So I'm in the Deshaun Jones. I'm a fan. So let's look at And hopefully that doesn't bite us in the butt there a little bit. Evan, any major thoughts on the depth chart? The first chart that definitely won't change at all.
Well, I was looking at the punter position. Noticed that Ryan Wright was listed as the starting punter, which is kind of surprising because he struggled at the end of last year. And I kind of heard some rumblings through camp that Seth Vernon was looking pretty decent. And so it was interesting to see that he's likely going to remain the starting punter. So at least that's the indication right now.
Yeah, the Seth Vernon for P1 that was very vivid and palpable in June, and it seems like either somehow Ryan Wright closed the gap at training camp. We don't get a whole lot of punter highlights, and so they're gonna have to make a decision on that. That's probably what the preseason games are for. The other ones I'll mention before we move on to the next topic are Duke Shelley on this depth chart was like CB7, CB8. So either they made a mistake or he is fighting to even make the roster. They must really adore newcomer Fabian Moreau because he is CB4, and they had to put him on this roster recently, and it seems like they strategically did it that high. And I don't know if it's a surprise, but a confirmation that Lewis Seen and Andrew Booth were utterly buried on this thing. It seems, sadly, that I don't know how they find a roster spot for Seen when they have so many damn safeties. Yeah. And then Booth at CB5. If you interpret this depth chart the way I do, that's right on the roster bubble. That can go either way. But it really sucks that these guys we've had all the patience for feel like nothing burgers.
Exactly. And while we're on the cornerback topic, I think my biggest surprise for the last couple of weeks, for me personally, is not that they haven't added more cornerbacks to the roster. It's that they haven't added, like, good ones. Ones that
isn't it funny? Yeah. I have to go look up Jacoby Francis, and I'm like, all right, if I don't know who he is, that's a big problem.
Yeah. You think at this point, like, even trading assets for a known commodity, like, if it's, unless you're, selling your entire future for a guy, like, I mean, I wouldn't have been shocked to see, like, a second round pick traded for some guy that we're all like, oh yeah, this will be a really good, addition to the team. And we're just a couple of guys. We don't know anything. So for all I know, they've been making calls and they just couldn't find the right deal or make anything work. But I am surprised that, Stephon Gilmore and some of the other guys that are out there aren't on the team right now. Like, you figure they would have at least been desperate enough to make a bigger name move than Fabian Moreau or, Jacoby Francis. Like, I don't know. I'm kind of deflated on what they haven't done for that position recently.
Yeah, every time I saw a new alert last week, it was some defensive back that you had to, like, scour the deep bowels of the internet to figure out who he was. Aside from Fabian Moreau, he played a lot last year, but he's very mid. So I'm right there with you. The good news is if they ever wake up on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday morning, or like, oh shit, we got to fix this, fellas, they can go get Gilmore. They can go get Akella Witherspoon. Xavier Howard has a real rotten legal problem going on. I don't want anything to do with him unless that's adjudicated. So there are solutions out there. This discussion feels a lot like what we talked about at WR3 20 minutes ago. Like, there's a lot of guys. So I understand if they feel confident in it. But I keep coming back to, all right, Byron Murphy, he wasn't great. He was pretty good last year. And then Shaq Griffin, by the way, his hamstring, that was tweaked. It really sucked that Kyrie Jackson died. And then it really sucked that Mekhi Blackman was the first major NFL injury of the summer. I didn't think they had a cornerback problem going into the summer because Murphy, Shaq Griffin, Kyrie Jackson, Mekhi Blackman, you could only have so many cornerbacks on the field on each play. I don't know why people wanted us to be like 7 cornerbacks deep. But now it seems like they were vindicated because one passed away and one's, ACL popped. So they evidently really like Dwight McGlothern, or they really like Duke Shelley, but refuse to promote him on the depth chart. Because the solutions are staring us in the face, just like we've said about WR3 for 5 months. Yeah. I'd say right now, cornerback, CB, and defensive tackle are the 2 positions that I'm queasy about.
Yeah. And I would argue, and I think you'd probably agree with me too, the WR3 problem, they've obviously had that fixed in-house, at least in their mind. They haven't added anybody, but cornerback, I mean, they've had to add people because of, circumstances, but they have added people. It's just nobody, it's not like they added Fabian Moreau 2 months ago on a hey, we'll get him in here in camp, and then they're like, oh man, he's doing great. We don't have to add Stephon Gilmore because even though we've had these injuries, Fabian's been working awesome for 2 months. He's been there for 2 weeks, not even. So I don't know. That's where I'm coming from, and I will be glad to be wrong and see the Vikings defensive backfield just flourish this year if that happens. But that scares me because I know how important that cornerback position specifically is to the game of football. It's almost as important as a run game. I mean, you have to defend the pass.
Yeah. The other thing that sucks, the other thing is, let's say we have another season where the secondary or the cornerback spot is rough, and that's the defense undoing. I am so sick of talking about cornerbacks in the draft for the Vikings. I feel like most of my adult life, or at least my 30s into my 40s, you get to February, you pull up ESPN.com, and it's like, hey, which cornerback are they going to pursue? Because they can never get it right. Mm-hmm. So for my own selfish purposes, I hope somebody out of this group, like McLaughlin, busts out, because I really don't want to have to do another full off season of talking about which CB are they going to draft. I'd much rather they think about defensive tackle, a drought they really need to end. Yeah,
exactly. And on that front, I'm just foolishly believing Jaquelin Roy is just going to be a Pro Bowler this year. He's going to solve all the
problems. Him or Levi Drake Rodriguez. Well, either one we'll be fine with.
Oh, yeah, Project X or Player X. Which that'd be really cool, but, man, it's hard to believe in that. Yeah. I haven't tested yet. I mean, that's probably about as much as we can dive into the first unofficial depth chart. I did have one more question for you, because listeners will remember right at the end of our last conversation a month or so ago, almost as we were saying goodbye, you had a footnote where you were saying, oh, and hey, don't forget, Cam Akers sounds like he's going to be on the team. Like, that's real. That's not just, fake smoke. That's real steam. So what happened? Why is he a Texan and not a Viking right now?
Well, he's a Texan that looked great in front of everybody in the preseason. So on July 2nd, ESPN had it on their single transaction page. I found it by accident. I was looking up the total number of players the Vikings had signed in the past couple months or some shit like that. And right there, it stared me in the face. It said Cam Akers re-signed by Vikings pending physical. And then that was the only place anywhere. It was NFL's wire was blank. NFLVikings.com didn't have Akers on the roster at all. And so I reached out to one of the folks that I trust, who's usually right, and I said, is this real? And he was like, oh, yeah, they're trying to get him back. So I just proceeded for, 2-3 weeks like we all did with, this is a really weird roster mystery, but evidently he'll be back. And then we found out he signed with the Texans. So I'm still trying to figure out if he failed the physical and nobody reported it, or if the Vikings just never signed him and ESPN totally bungled it. So, yeah, I got that wrong. I thought ESPN was somewhat trustworthy, and then the source on top of it that said, oh, yeah, that's in the works. Who knows, though, because if the Texans, I don't think that they desperately need running back depth. There's always a chance that Akers is released at the end of the summer, and then he could come back. We already know that he has a good relationship in this locker room. But, yeah, Akers was very strange because it felt like there was footage of him working out in Egan. I think way back in January, somebody on Instagram said something about, hey, is Akers coming back to Minnesota? And he said something in replies that was like, oh, yeah, bet. I'm going to be there, baby. So it always felt like this one was going to come back around full circle and he could be the RB3. But it seems like the Vikings like Myles Gaskin or Dwayne McBride for that job.
Yeah, it's intriguing. A fun little mystery for sure.
There's so many of those throughout recent Vikings history. Like, I want to know why Cameron Dantzler was benched by Mike Zimmer. I don't think we'll ever figure that one out. There's all those little mysteries that, normal people wouldn't care about. I care. I want to know how forceful the Vikings were to try to get Drake May, if they were turned down every step of the way, or if that was just, no, we like McCarthy. All kinds of little Vikings mysteries that I think about that are probably counterproductive.
Yeah, well, and on that note, too, I always kind of go back to What exactly happened with Teddy Bridgewater? There's all that secrecy and all the smoke and mirrors with that whole horrific situation, but that'd be fun to know more info about.
There's one. I think I've told you guys this before, maybe I haven't. Joe Johnson, the founder of Purple PTSD, and then he bought Vikings territory 7 years ago. He passed away in 2021. But he used to tell me, in his heart of hearts, and he claimed his intel was good, that the time Mike Zimmer had the patch on his eye, it's because Pat Shurmur punched him. And he swore to God, like his people, like, and Joe talked with the players, like he knew like a lot of offensive linemen, reservist players, and he used to tell me that the reason that just showed up out of nowhere with no explanation was because he and Pat Shurmur got pissed and Shurmur popped him. Now, I don't know if that's just Vikings folklore, but Joe Johnson absolutely believed it.
Well, and if you go back to the time Kirk had Zimmer by the collar, maybe there is something to that. I don't know. That'd be a fun podcast episode, is to crystal ball and just know all the mysteries.
All of these. Oh, I could spend 6 hours writing them all up tonight. Yep. The questions to ask the crystal ball, that is.
There we go. I expect an article on Vikings. The 10 Vikings mysteries we need to know about.
It'd be our purple unsolved mysteries type of thing.
There we go. All right, Evan, anything else for Dustin before we start to wrap things up a little bit?
No, I'm just excited for the first preseason game and excited to talk with you in a handful of weeks from now and get your thoughts on either what's going to happen or what has happened in the first regular season game.
Yeah, you guys talk amongst yourself and decide if we want to do the Tuesday before week one, or you want to do a recap of week one to talk about what we saw, and you guys holler at me, all right?
Yeah, definitely will do. Well, until we have you on next time, where can people find your stuff? What are you putting out there? Who else do you want to kind of pump up a little bit? Where can we find Dustin Baker?
So that's VikingsTerritory.com. That's where I do all of the writing. Yannick Eckhart and myself and Josh Fry, we have a new website getting off the ground called DraftHuddle.com. That should go live in about 2 weeks. Our goal there is we've always joked amongst ourselves how draft sites, like the really cool ones like Draft Network and Pro Football Network, it always seems like they leave rookies for dead after the draft. So our website is going to focus on the draft and then the subsequent rookie performance of each player so that they're not just orphaned like on May 1st.
Yeah.
So that gets off the ground here soon. And then Vikes Now, I usually get about between 4 and 6 episodes per week. And then I come talk to you guys once a month. So be sure to check out all of it.
Yeah, definitely.